is away from because we told the break now.
कोई बात नहीं.
Yes, sir.
So we request you, ma'am, and hand over the session to you. Kindly proceed, share your PPT, and go ahead. I'll give you a mic.
Thank you, sir. Should I keep my video on, or because the participant number, it seems to be high? Streaming may go slow, I don't know.
Ma'am, it is a privilege to have to watch you and hear yourself, ma'am.
Okay.
So when you are the center right now, so I keep my video off, rather.
Okay. Is my screen visible?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So very good afternoon. It's, I think, good morning. Good morning to all of you. Good morning to Professor Pradeep, sir. Thank you, sir, for inviting me. And thank you, Geeta, for such a long introduction. So today I will be, presenting a tutorial based on predictive modeling and how to go about data processing and exploratory analysis in the field of predictive modeling. So before I begin, let me introduce you all to our research group that we have in the area of machine learning and software engineering at our department. So it is headed by Professor Yogesh Singh sir and myself, and we have a long list of students, PhD scholars, faculty members, MTech students, and BTech students working under us. So my tutorial will be divided broadly into 4 parts. First, I'll just brief you about predictive modeling. Then I'll explain you the processing and the exploratory part of predictive modeling. Then just a brief about machine learning, and I'll just give you a gist about what tools are available that you can apply in analyzing the data. So beginning with the, when we talk about predictive modeling, the first question that comes into our mind is, what is predictive modeling? So, predictive modeling basically is a process that is used in predictive analytics to create a model, to develop a model that can be used for predicting future behavior. Let me put my pointer on. Yeah. So it can be used to create a model that can be used. The purpose of predictive model is basically to have historical data with us, and we can use learning technique, any kind of data analysis technique that we found, to be appropriate. And the purpose is to create a model that can be used in future. So a predictive model is basically made of many components. First is number of predictors. That is, you can say, variables that are likely to influence future behavior or future results. Historical data is considered for, extracting predictive rules, which are then applied on future data. So we use historical data to create and develop a predictive model that can be used in future for predicting various things. So this is basically a diagram. It involves it shows you what are the steps involved in predictive modeling. So first is historical data. So how to go about. So my whole tutorial will be focused on how to collect data, how to process data, and how to analyze data. Then you can apply any technique. It depends, not necessarily the machine learning technique, any data analysis technique. It could be a statistical learning technique, any machine learning or evolutionary technique, and then predictive rules are extracted out of it, and any future instance that comes, then we can apply those predictive rules onto it. For example, if I have weather prediction data, so I can apply, I can first identify variables such as humidity, pressure, temperature, and my outcome variable could be whether the day is, rainy, it's kind of a windy day, or sunny day, or cloudy day. So I can, collect historical data, and I can apply various data analysis techniques, and then I can create or develop a model that can be used in future to predict whether it will be a rainy day, it will be a sunny day, and so on. So coming on to the data science that is, behind what are the steps involved in it in predictive modeling. The first, the step is, understanding the problem. What is the, what is actually motivation behind the work? Why I am doing this work? So understanding what is the issue that you are handling. Then collecting data. Then cleaning and analyzing the data. So the next step involves data cleaning and analysis. followed by developing the model and using any kind of data analysis technique, then validating the model, and finally reporting and discussing the results. So my first part will be totally focused on the steps involved, and I will keep you telling how to go about identifying the variable, how to go about formulation of hypothesis, how to go about you know processing the data, how to go about cleaning data, and so on. So, steps in predictive modeling, as I've already told you, first is the two main things that are involved is the data and the data analysis technique. So, first step involved is collection of historical data. There are various venues how you can collect historical data. I will introduce you when I move on to the later part in the slides. Then selection of an appropriate technique. See, very important, what I feel whenever I deliver my tutorials is I always tell um, the academicians and the students present in my lecture that you should always use an appropriate. When I say appropriate, does not mean that I select a technique because it's very popular, or because my another of my colleague is using it. So there should be a proper mechanism of there should be a logic behind why you're selecting a particular technique. Then going on with the cleaning part. So the next step involved is how to go about data cleaning, how to analyze data, how to summarize data, how to describe data, and how to handle missing values, or how to handle my values that lie very far away from me, that is known as outlier analysis, and so on. So then comes this step. After that, if you have a range of attributes or variables. So attributes, variables, these are these terms are used interchangeably. The meaning is same when in context of predictive model. So then if you have a number of attributes, so you need to select related and the relevant ones, non-redundant ones, related ones, relevant ones. So that these are this step does that. And then followed by development of model, and then finally validating it and using the model in future prediction. Now, as I have already told you, the key elements that are involved in creation of a predictive model, first is the data and second is the technique. So any kind of data analysis technique, so we will come on to how to go about the selection of an appropriate. When I say appropriate, the meaning of appropriate I will discuss in detail. Before that, I will in very very detail I'll explain you the research methodology that is behind creation of the model, and step by step I'll keep on telling you how to collect data, how to identify variables, how to formulate hypotheses, and how to basically go on to exploratory analysis. So if you have an experiment, how to carry forward that experiment. So all these steps will one by one tell you how to go about it. So before I begin, what is empirical studies? So you see, empirical studies basically they attempt to compare the theories and your practical observation using real world data. So when you compare your theoretical foundations with the observations that you have got using some real world data, it's known as an empirical study. So they utilize data analysis method and statistical techniques for exploring the relationship. So the relationship amongst variables are explored using various analysis methods and statistical techniques. Now it's a 5-phase process. Empirical study is a 5-phase process. So I'll introduce you to that process, and then we'll discuss each step in detail. First is study definition. Study definition involves determining what is the scope of the study. Very important. Why I am carrying out this study. How does this study contribute to academia, to research area? How does it contribute to societal issues? So what is my motivation behind the study? What is the purpose behind the study? What is the context or perspective, from whose perspective the study is being carried out? So all these questions are answered in the very first phase, that is known as study definition phase. Then comes your experiment design phase. In the experiment design phase, the first step is to carry out a systematic literature review. It's in itself vast area where I can speak for hours and hours how to do it, a systematic literature review. And then comes formulation of research questions, followed by hypothesis formulation. So hypothesis is something, your assumption that you formally state in when you formally state the assumption of your research is known as a hypothesis. Then comes, determining and identifying and defining the variables. Like when I gave you example of weather prediction, I identified temperature, identified humidity, I identified pressure, and then I identified an outcome variable that had, four categories: rainy, sunny, cloudy, windy. So, the next step involves is, defining, identifying the variables in the research. Then comes data collection part. So we'll discuss it in detail. And then next is, selecting appropriate data analysis method. And finally, identifying threats. Threats means, see, every empirical study, there is no empirical study that doesn't have any limitation or threat. So you need to identify the threats and you need to mitigate or remove them when in your work. If you're not able to remove, then you need to report them. So there may be some threats that you, if you identified it in the initial phase, that you may able to remove, and there may be some threats that still remain. For example, if you have taken a certain category of data, so obviously your results are only applicable to that category of data. So that is your threat or limitation that is present. Then comes your third phase, that is known as research conduct and analysis phase. In this basically comes your data processing part. Actually, the all the the techniques that you have identified in the previous phase are actually applied in this phase. You actually summarize your data in this phase, you identified attributes in this phase, you apply statistical test in this phase, you create a model in this phase, you whatever hypothesis you have formed in the previous phase, you test that hypothesis in this phase. So this is a actually an execution phase of your empirical study. Then comes the fourth phase, which is known as result interpretation phase. In this, basically, you theoretically and practically, validate the results, or you interpret the results in qualitative and quantitative forms. And finally, you draw the conclusion. And this limitation, that means whatever threats you could have removed, and then you finally need to state, in order to carry out a fair work, you need to state your limitation. So I mostly, when I review some papers, I see whether they have mentioned this section in their, empirical work or not, whether they have written a separate section on threats to validity or not. Then comes the reporting part. In reporting, basically, say, depends upon your venue. If you are, doing it for UGC, you may format it in a form of a report. If you are, preparing the paper for a conference, if it's an initial idea, you'll format in the form of a conference. And then if it's a journal paper, it's a detailed study. It depends upon the venue of your, if it's your MTech thesis, PhD thesis, then you may report it in form of a chapter. And finally, ethics and plagiarism. These are two important concerns in any empirical work. So let's go by step. The first step is research in your work is study definition. So defining the goals and objective of an empirical study. So this phase is divided into various parts or portions. First, what are the dimensions? Defining the scope of the work, dimensions of the study. Why I am doing it. So very, very important question. Why I am carrying out this study? What entity is being studied? What is the whether I'm studying a process, whether I'm for example studying a product. So what is the entity that I am studying? What is the aim, purpose of the study? From whose perspective is the study being carried out? From manager's perspective, from developer's perspective, from customer's perspective. So you need to identify and you need to answer this question in this phase. And finally, identifying the domain, the area of the study. So all these questions need to be answered and documented in the first phase, that is a study definition phase. The scope, purpose, motivation, perspective, domain. So after that comes the very, very important, it's the most significant and important phase in empirical study. It's known as experiment design phase. So in this step, you identify everything from data, from variables, to what data pre-processing techniques you will use, what data cleaning techniques you will use, formulation of hypothesis. Everything is the part of this phase. So the design of the experiment covers stating research questions, formulation of hypothesis, selection of variables, data collection strategies, selection of appropriate data analysis methods, identification of threats to validity. So everything, is the part of experiment design phase. So now I have grouped the various steps of experiment design phase. So first step is, understanding the problem, identifying the goals and the research questions. Then comes doing exhaustive literature review. So when in order to carry out the exhaustive literature review, you need to explore various digital portals such as IEEE Explore, ACM Digital Portal, Wiley, or you can explore Science Direct, or you can explore, Google Scholar and other platforms, digital platforms, so that you are well versed with the area. First, you need to be well versed with the area. Then comes creating solution to the problem. Here, multiple thing needs to be done. You need to identify the data, you need to select the variable, you need to formally state your assumption in the form of hypothesis, and then you need to appropriately, select an appropriate data analysis method. So coming on to research questions, how to go about identifying the research questions. So the first step in the experiment design is to formulate the research questions. This step states the problem in the form of questions and identifies the main concepts and relations that needs to be explored. So you need to first, state formally the research questions. So how do you identify research question? See, whenever you need to identify research questions, you need to keep into mind three things. First thing, what is the existing relation to the research? How you are able to relate that question to with the existing literature. Secondly, how will you solve it? What data you will use to solve that question, answer that question? What methods you will use to answer that question? And what data processing techniques you will use. So what are the various subcategories of list of, you can say, techniques that you will use to answer that question. And finally, the most important thing you need to keep in mind, how will you contribute to the area? What new contribution will you make? Whether it will benefit academician, researcher, society, what benefit will this, the new thing that you are doing will be in, benefit, how it will benefit the, people in the area. So that you need to answer. So whenever you form a question, you need to, in your mind, you need to, think about the keep these things in mind before formulation of question. Now coming back to, this is one example that I have given. What is the effect of matrix on fault proneness? Fault proneness means the probability of occurrence of a fault in a module. So how measures such as coupling, size, cohesion will affect the fault proneness of a module. So this I may want to explore this. So this is one of the example of a research question. After identifying the research, after developing the research questions, rather I may say, you need to review the literature. Literature review, I told you need to do an exhaustive literature review. You need to search various research portals, and you need to find out those the publications that are closest to your work. So you need to identify relevant and related research, and so you are well versed with the position of the work in the field. So whenever you are doing a literature review, all these things you need to keep in your mind, and all these questions you should keep on answering simultaneously. Now, first, what are the key theories and concept in the existing literature that are being used? What are the academic terminologies and information sources being used? What are the key questions that already researchers have addressed till date? What are the areas in which authors have different opinion? So you may want to explore those areas. What are the key areas where knowledge gaps exist? Very important. What are the major issues and controversies that are related to the topic? So what are the controversies or major issues that are related to the topic? What have been various methodologies used, and what is the quality? Actual till date, the empirical studies that is being carried out, what is the quality of that study? And finally, what is the future scope that can be done? So every paper or each publication may have mentioned the future research, and you can also yourself, after going through so many papers, identify the future scope. After that comes the task of selection of variables. See, formally, two terms are used for, when we do a experiment or a empirical study, are used, formally. First is independent variable and second is dependent variable. Independent variables are, nothing but, predictor or input variables. And dependent variable is nothing but output or, target variable. So basically, in any, exploratory study, you will want to find, establish the relationship amongst the independent and the dependent. Dependent is always a single variable, and there may be multiple independent variable. So independent variable is a variable that can be changed or modified or varied to find the effect of, its effect on the dependent variable. Thus, the dependent variable is dependent on the independent variable. So basically, what do you do when, you actually, have multiple independent variable and you want to explore the effect of these independent variable on the dependent variable? So how, the selection of variables, basically it's based on various factors. First is your researcher's experience. So if you are already been doing, work in the area, you may be, be aware of how to select a variable. Or you can gain insight from the information that has already been published. You have, read the related work, so you may be able to identify variables from that related work. And thirdly, you can take advice from, various authors, researchers, experts in the related areas. So that is the another way of identifying variables. So, the variables that you identify, they can be measured, or they on, various measurement scales. They can be of various types, and broadly they are divided into two types: discrete or categorical or continuous. So either they will be of categorical type or they will be continuous type. Categorical means the high, medium, low. So it has few categories. So something that can be defined in, for example, rainy, windy, cloudy, sunny. So four categories were there. So that is known as categorical data. When there are few categories involved in it, male, female. Now categorical can further be divided into two parts: nominal or ordinal. Nominal is, when there is no order present. For example, faulty, not faulty, male, female, there is no order. Rainy, cloudy, sunny, there is no order. When you say high, medium, low, there is an order. Higher is higher than medium, medium is higher than low. So there is an order present. So it's a kind of ordinal variable. So, categorical variable can further be divided into nominal and ordinal variables. Finally, the third type of scale is, continuous scale. It represents amount of magnitude, such as, number of faults in a class, number of, lines of source code in a module, and so on. So as you can see here that, categorical data can be divided into two parts. First is nominal. So when scale can be divided into categories of classes and there is no ordering or ranking involved in those categories, it's known as of nominal type. On this scale, ordinal can be divided into categories of classes. However, these categories have ranking or ordering. So when you have ranking or ordering, it's known as ordinal scale. Now your, continuous scale can be divided into three categories. First is interval. Interval means on any part of the scale when the difference between two adjacent points is equal. So the scale has no arbitrary 0 point. Example, temperature. So in this scale, one value cannot be represented as a multiple of another due to absence of arbitrary 0 point. Then comes ratio. So they are like interval scales with an absolute 0 point, and one value can be then expressed as a multiple of other. For example, weight. So you can say this person is twice as higher as, other person. So when one value can be expressed as a multiple of other, it's known as a ratio kind of scale. Absolute means raw count. It represents simple counts, number of faults found, lines of source code, and so on. So these are, broadly, we have two scales, categorical and continuous, and then they further be divided into various scales: nominal, ordinal, and for continuous, interval, ratio, and absolute. So my area being software engineering, so if I want to identify variables related to software engineering, so the dependent variables can be different matrix. Matrix, when I say, I mean, matrix related to size, coupling, number of private classes, number of public classes, lines of source code, and so on. So there are a lot of matrix, coupling between objects, and so many. So let's do a small exercise, so you have idea about what I want to say. Let's see, there is a playground that is next to your house. So for the past 2 weeks, you have been noticing if there were kids that were playing on the playground or not. So based on the data collected, you would like to be able to predict if kids will be playing on the playground on a specific day or not. So can anyone tell me what kind of data would you collect to decide whether the kids should play on the playground or not? You can switch on your mic and let me know.
This will be categorical data, madam.
Maybe categorical, maybe continuous. Whatever data, you need to identify data, then categories with when which type will be identified. Any kind of data.
Weather conditions.
Weather, days,
whether humidity, whether day means whether it's a weekend, whether
whether
it's
it's a
Yeah.
weekend or weekday,
and the time also.
Day,
Whether it's
Sunday,
afternoon,
Monday,
and the
or
time,
evening, yes.
and the
time
time,
also.
morning, evening.
Even whether the student, your kid has test or not going on or not, that can be, then whether it is a rainy day, cloudy day, or sunny day. So there are so many factors that could impact your decision. So I have identified, 3 factors related to weather. First is forecast. You will see whether it will be, in the evening it will be a cloudy evening or a sunny evening or a rainy day. So then temperature, whether it will be hot, mild, cool or anything. And then humidity, whether it will be high, low, normal. And this is your dependent variable. So yes or no. So yes or no, that means it's of nominal time. So dependent variable is nominal time.
Ma'am,
So
this we are doing in the form of supervised learning, right? Because
right now, yes, because you have a dependent variable. Later on,
yes,
you will have to apply a technique. That is, if you want to create a model you have to apply a supervised learning technique
okay.
because you
Ma'am,
have a
could you please
supervisor
explain
here.
with unsupervised also after this task get over? After your explanation of this thing get
I
over,
have
because
few, unsupervised. I'll give you few examples later on.
yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, say there is a medical team studying a specific heart disease. So for the past 2 years, the team has noticed various attributes of all patients who were detected with the disease. Based on the data collected, we would like to able to predict if a person would be detected with a heart disease or not. So now, can you identify variables involved in it? Quickly, you can switch on your mics, and one by one, you can tell me what variables you can identify.
तो अच्छा है ऐसा होना नहीं चाहिए. I'm also quite hopeful.
Anyone can tell me what variables you will identify. See, your dependent variable will be heart disease is present or not present.
We
So
will
it's
perform
again a
certain
nominal kind of
tests.
variable.
We will perform certain blood tests based on test 1, test 2, test 3. Consider there are 3 tests which will prove whether a person is having a heart disease or not.
No. आपको टेस्ट तो कैरी आउट नहीं करना ना. You have historical data with you.
Blood pressure.
So what
cholesterol.
factors do you
Clinical data related
attributes of
to
all patients
the
you want to
heart
examine?
patients.
Just forget about clinical data right now. So maybe blood pressure, whether it's high, medium, low. He's a vegetarian or not vegetarian. He is smoking or not smoking. He's drinking or not drinking.
Yes.
What
Giving
is
cholesterol
his
level.
BMI, his cholesterol level. Any other factor you can think of?
His age.
His age.
Daily routine.
Daily routine. Yes.
Family history.
Yes, very important. Family history.
Lifestyle
Lifestyle.
may cover most of the things.
Eating habits.
Yes, vegetarian, non-vegetarian, yes, or vegetarian, yes. So all these variables you can use to predict whether he'll have a heart disease or not. So you have historical data already present for patients. So this is a way you can identify variables. Then comes the next very important part after identifying variables. So we did for two, just real world examples, we identified variables. So now the next important task in experiment design, the most important is formulation of hypothesis. How to formulate a hypothesis. First, what is a hypothesis? See, the main objective of an experiment always is to evaluate a given relationship. So you need to formulate your assumption in a formal statement. You need to state it in the formal form. So hypothesis is nothing but a formal statement that presents the expected relationship between dependent and independent variables. So what is expected by the. So a researcher should carefully state the hypothesis to be tested in the study, and the hypothesis is tested on the sample data. Now, whenever you state a hypothesis, it is done, you need to formulate a null hypothesis. Hypothesis testing is always known as testing of falsification, test of false. Why? Because first you state null hypothesis. Null hypothesis, a experimenter or researcher always want to reject. So that you want to reject, you want to falsify it. And then you state alternate hypothesis. Alternate hypothesis represents your assumption, and it always you want to, prove your assumption. So let's take an example that my assumption is, girls will achieve a higher reading comprehension test scores than boys at the end of first semester. So this is my assumption. So null hypothesis, I will state there is no difference between, the test scores of between the two means of the test scores on the reading comprehension of girls and boys. So there is no difference. That is my null hypothesis. I want to reject it. Alternate hypothesis will be the girls' mean score on the reading comprehension test will significantly exceed that of the boys. So I have converted my assumption in formal form, in the form of formal statement. So this is the way in which we create hypothesis, null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis. After you have formulated a hypothesis, you need to collect data. So being, my area in software engineering, so I'll introduce you towards data collection in the area of software engineering. So empirical research involves collecting and analyzing data. So the data collection needs to be planned, and the source from which the data is to be collected needs to be decided. So you need to decide what will be the source, from where the data needs to be collected. So the researcher should state the environment in which the study is being performed, the programming language in which the system. So I am talking about software field. So the programming language in which the system are developed, the size in which the size of the system that you are analyzing in terms of lines of code or anything, or number of classes, and then the duration for which the systems were developed. So all these factors of data need to be collected and stated. Now coming on collecting data from software repositories. So, there are three, I will say, dimensions from where you can get the data. First is from student software. That means academic. So data that is developed by the students of some university. So you can take those projects and collect data. Then second dimension is industry. So proprietary data that belong to some private organization or some company. So you can collect data from a software industry. Thirdly, you can collect data that is either available online, already collected, or you can collect data from open source software. So data sets that are freely available or to everyone for use and does not require any payment. Or you can collect data from open source software. So these are three ways in which data can be collected. Academic, no longer we do. First dimension, I will say, is no longer valid because the data you collect from the student software is in itself, not reliable. In terms, they don't have that experience. In terms, they don't use appropriate industrial methodologies to develop the data. So it will be far away. If you conduct a study using data collected from academic software, it will be far away from real world. Now, what a researcher wants data from industry. But it's very difficult to get data from industry because due to security, due to ethical issues, I will come on to ethical issues too. Industry don't trust the universities, specifically in Indian context, because when I was there in US, also in Finland, I observed that they do have industrial collaborations and they do collect data from there. But in here, we don't get it easily. Third dimension is public. And that is the compromise you can make between academia and industry. That you can collect the data from open source software, or you can use already existing data on open source platforms. And open source softwares are, they have a well defined methodologies, and various programmers from different geographical locations, they come together and work together to collect, to develop those software. So for example, Android software, Apache's foundation software, so all these, they are well known softwares, so you can collect data from there. So academic data developed by student programmer is generally, very small in size, and the number of developers who develop them are limited, and the methodology also used is not formal. So open source software repositories can be mined to collect data, such as Git repositories. So you can, collect data from those repositories. So normally software companies are not willing to share their information about the software system. So, collecting data from open source repositories is a, good solution to this problem. And in fact, back in 2020, so say we have, you can say 2000, sorry, we have started, we have open source repository, and we started collecting data from there. Now that's why, lot number of studies in defect prediction, reliability prediction, change prediction, effort prediction have increased exponentially, because we have data with us. So you will see after 2001 or 2002, this concept came of open source repositories and open source software, where, from where we can get data, and the number of studies have exceed, there are lot many studies that are conducted in this field. Now comes another very important, every step of design is, very important when you carry out an experiment or empirical study. Then comes selection of appropriate data analysis method. And when I'm saying appropriate, I have a meaning to that. Normally I have seen, senior researchers also, because they select a technique because, for example, deep learning. Since deep learning has come, every student of mine, every PhD candidate, they want to, use deep learning technique without determining whether even it is applicable in their field or not. So appropriate selection of an appropriate data analysis method is very important. Let me, first explain you an example, and then begin with how to go about selection. Let's take an example of naive Bayes technique. Now, naive Bayes, if you study that technique, it has a very strong assumption that the independent variables are actually independent. That means there is no correlation between the independent variables. So if you have related independent variables, naive Bayes technique will not be, an appropriate technique to go for. So, you need to study the advantages, disadvantages, the characteristic of a technique before selecting a technique. There are few statistically based technique that has some assumption data should be normal. So they are known as parametric techniques. So you can only apply those techniques if the assumptions are satisfied. If your data doesn't satisfy the assumption, you don't want to correct the data, then why will you use the parametric techniques? So the data analysis techniques are selected based on the type of, dependent variables. So first dimension is, type of dependent variable. So I can apply linear regression when my dependent variable is continuous. I can apply logistic regression when my dependent variable is categorical. Then comes, identifying the strengths and weakness, and, analyzing the characteristics, parameters of the various available techniques. So there are three criteria based on which you can identify a data analysis technique. First is type of dependent variable. Obviously, linear regression cannot be applied when your type is categorical. Nature of data set, size of data set. Then important aspects of different algorithm. We'll discuss all this is very clear when these two will discuss. When I say type, I told you whether it's categorical or, continuous. So based on that, I can identify the techniques. Then comes nature. When I say nature, I mean diversity in data. As I told you, if the data has, data is redundant, related, you cannot apply naive Bayes. In principle, you should not apply naive Bayes. Then comes type and existence of interaction amongst variables. So how much interaction is there amongst variables? And finally, what is the size of your training set? So first you analyze your data, and, data set differs from, one study to other study. But we never carry out this step. I have never seen experiment or researcher performing this step in perfection. It is missing from the research. I think we normally apply a technique because either it's very popular. My course is PhD student is applying, or my supervisor is told to apply this. But it's very important to analyze that technique and see whether it's applicable to your work or not. Third very important thing when you select a data analysis method is selecting an appropriate going about selecting various checking various aspects of algorithm. First it's accuracy, it's predictive power. Second is speed. See, if you have a mission critical, time critical system where time is very important, then you need to check whether that what will be the what is the speed there, the time that is required to train a model. Neural network, evolutionary techniques, they are research based technique. They may take days and days to execute, and if the time is a very important criteria, you will not go about selection of those techniques. Then comes interpretability. The results produced by the algorithm they are simple, and they can be easily interpreted. See, if you are not able to understand a technique, you should never apply that technique. If you are not able to hard code that technique, so you should be able to yourself code that technique. So in Python, if I normally see students calling various functions, but they should actually try to understand and code the techniques by themselves. So it's very important that a technique should not be a black box for you. So normally we choose a technique as a black box, and you don't know what is inside that box. So it's very important that the technique should be very simple and it should be easily interpretable. Other consideration that you might take into, other factors that you might consider while selecting a technique is its ability. So if you have, missing values, then the technique should be able to handle those missing values. If you have outliers, then the technique should be able. Outlier means data points. I will tell you how to go about data processing. So outlier means those points that lie very far away from the mean. For example, I have one student has weight 150, and all other mean weight lie between 50 to 75 of all the other students. So that's an outlier that lies very far away from the mean. Then comes accuracy of class probability. Class imbalance problem in specifically empirical software engineering. It's very upcoming field where we are having so many publications, papers. Imbalance means, see, if I have outcome variable and one category. So in weather prediction problem, there were 4 categories of outcome variable: sunny, rainy, cloudy, windy. In Indian context, I will have majority of instances in sunny category, very few in rainy category, very few in cloudy category. So what happens is that I have this imbalance. This is known as imbalance learning problem, where I have one category in majority and other category is minority. So the results that are produced, the model that is created, it's a biased model towards the category that has majority instances. So the ability to handle class imbalance, a technique. If you have an imbalanced data, you need a technique that can handle that, or you first need to balance it. Then comes ability to handle non-vector data. If you have it, ability to handle high dimensional data if you have a high dimensional data. Finally, the last step in the experiment design phase is validity threats. Identifying threats is very important. So threats are potential risks that may arise due to planning and execution of empirical studies. So planning and execution of empirical studies. So you may have various limitations that are present in your study. So a validity threat is a specific way in which you might go wrong. So you need to identify those dimensions where you may go wrong. So first thing is that you should identify the threats, and then you should formulate a strategy of mitigating it, removing it as far as possible. If you are not, we cannot, in an empirical study, experimental study, you cannot, or an exploratory study, you cannot remove the threats completely. When as it is, as we say in software testing, you cannot produce a zero defect software. So you cannot have a study without with zero threats. So there may be you need to identify those risks. You should remove that risks, but few that remain, then you need to report it fairly in your study. There is no harm in reporting it. And I have told you that if this section is normally missing, I do, whenever I take, I do, when I review a paper, I do give a lot of weightage and I do read this section very carefully. There are two categories of threats, external validity threats and, internal validity threats. External validity threats means, threats that are related to your generalization related threats. For example, if you have collected data from a C++ developed software, so the results may not be applicable to the software developed in Java language. Although transfer learning is a very important upcoming area where we can transfer knowledge from one language to another, one matrix to another, and so on. Then comes, conclusion validity threats, internal validity threats. When you are, not able to conclude. So if you are applying a statistical test, so always there will be a type 1, type 2 error that will be associated with it. So all these things, you need to take into account. So, and report them. Now we are going on to the third phase in empirical study, that is known as research, conduct, and analysis phase. So here in this phase, basically, you execute whatever you have decided in the previous phase. Now comes your execution part. So finally, the empirical study is conducted following the steps described in the experiment design phase. So the experiment analysis phase involves understanding the data by collecting descriptive stats. The unrelated attributes are removed and the best attributes are selected out of a set of attributes using, attribute reduction techniques. After removing the irrelevant or redundant attributes, you perform hypothesis testing using various statistical techniques, and on the basis of the results obtained, a decision regarding the acceptance or rebuttal of the hypothesis is made. So in this phase, basically, you execute the statistical test and you create the model, you validate the model, and then you make a decision whether you will accept or reject the hypothesis that you have formulated in the research. Finally, for analyzing the causal relationship between the independent variables and the dependent variable, the model is created, developed, and it is validated. So these are the steps in analyzing and interpreting data. So I will, in detail, I'll explain you each of the step. First is metric data analysis. So here you summarize the data. Data summarization in the form of using descriptive stats: mean, median, mode, variance, standard deviation, quartile, and so on. So in order to gain insight about the data, you calculate all these stats. Then comes identifying outliers, values that lie far away from the mean. You need to identify them. Then comes an optional step. If you want to do correlation analysis, you can do that. Next, step is attribute reduction. There are two types of attribute reduction techniques. First is attribute selection. Selection means you have 5 attributes, for example. You will select the important ones from those 5, maybe 3, 2, or so on. Extraction means you have 5 attributes. You convert those attributes into new dimensions, and each dimension has more than one related attribute as a part of it. That can be, for example, done using principal component analysis. Then comes your hypothesis testing, followed by identifying performance. So in order to develop a model, you need some performance evaluation measures. How will you evaluate the performance of the measures? Then you need to validate the model. I will explain you all these 3 techniques. And finally, you can apply model comparison tests. So in my data analysis class, I always teach students how to apply these model comparison tests. Either you can use PRT test, you can use Wilcoxon-Sainte-Rank test, you can use Nemenai test, you can use Friedman test, and so on. So basically, the purpose of these tests is to statistically validate the results. If you say naive Bayes is better than decision tree, so because your study showed better accuracy in your sample data, so you need to, if you want to statistically validate this fact, you need to apply the tests. So let's begin one by one. First is descriptive stats. The research data must be suitably reduced to be read easily and used for further analysis. Descriptive stats concern, development of certain indices and or measures to summarize the data. So you can use either measures of central tendency or measures of dispersion. Data can be summarized by using measures of central tendency or the measures of dispersion. Mean, median, mode are three measures that can be used, and standard deviation, quartile, variance are other method that can be used. So measures of central tendency are used to summarize the average value of the attributes. They can be mean, median, mode. So they give you idea about the central values of the data. So the nature of the data, you understand the nature of data when you do carry out this pre-processing step. So I am not going into much detail, but mean is defined as the sum of value of the data points divided by the total number of points. So everyone must be aware of this fact. The median is the value which divides the data into halves. Half of the number of data points are below the median value, and half of the data points are exactly above the median value. Mode means the value that has the highest frequency in the distribution. So if you have 3 occurring 5 times, so it's 3 is the mode. So the measure of dispersion indicate the spread. So if you want to, check the spread or the range of the distribution of the data set, you can use, this measure, standard deviation or, variance. So there are various measures of dispersion that you can use: range, standard deviation, variance, quartile. Range is defined, as the difference between highest value and lowest value in the distribution. So you can calculate range very easily. The advantage of using range meaning is that it is simple to compute, and the disadvantage that it only takes up into account 2 extreme values. Interquartile range can be used to overcome this disadvantage. So you can use interquartile range. The quartile divides the data into 4 parts for computation. So 4 parts you can see here. So first, there is median. So half of the data lies below it, half of the data lies above it. Then you take median of the initial value in the median part. Then you get lower quartile. Then you take median of data from median to the highest value, and then you get upper quartile. So the quartile divides the matrix data into 4 equal parts. For computation, the data is first needed to be arranged in ascending order. So obviously your data is arranged in ascending order, and you keep on dividing it into 4 parts. Now 25% of the matrix data is below the lower quartile. You can see here. 25% of data is below the lower quartile. 50% of data is below the median. 75% of matrix data is below the upper quartile. 75% data is below the upper quartile. So this is, it will give you idea about, the interquartile range. So the lower quartile is computed by computing the median of the data set, computing the median of lower half of the data set, basically. Upper quartile is computed by computing the median of upper part of the data set. And the interquartile range is nothing but it's calculated as the difference between quartile 3 and quartile 1. Now comes, measures of dispersion. So measures of dispersion, there are various measures of dispersion such as, as range and quartiles and standard deviation and variance we have discussed. Now this example shows us that, highest value is 300 in this data and lowest value is 200. So I have calculated the difference between this 270. So you can see here that first module has 200 lines of code and the last has 3000. So this is and if I'll divide it in terms of quartiles, so median value will somewhere be here, and Q1 will be 240, Q3 will be 300. So my interquartile range will be 300 minus 240, that is 60. Now I'm just quickly going because I think all of you must be knowing about it, just summarizing them for you. Standard deviation and variance, they are used to measure the average distance of a point from the mean. So standard deviation is defined as it is used to measure the average distance of data point from the mean. It is large if most of the data points are near to the mean. So it is defined as the difference of the data point from the mean and the square and divided by the total number of observation and taking the under score of it. So you can see the difference of value from the mean. And then when you variance is basically the square of standard deviation. Now, in order to understand the metric data, the starting value is to analyze the shape of the distribution. So after it, you need to analyze. See, when I talk about exploring data, I need to analyze the shape of the data. So there are a number of methods you can use to analyze the shape of the data. One of them is histogram analysis, through which a researcher can gain insight about normality. So when I say analyzing the shape, you can plot the frequencies, and then you can superimpose the normal curve and see whether the data lies between this curve or not. So you'll get an idea about the normality of the data by using this method. So the bars I have shown you, it shows lines of code metric, and the normal curve is then superimposed on the distribution of values so that you can determine the normality of this particular variable. So most of the data, as you can see, is right skewed or left skewed. So these curves are not applicable when you have categorical data such as nominal or ordinal. For example, the classes may be faulty or not faulty. Then you cannot calculate the normality of such kind of variables. Now, the measures of central tendency such as mean, median, mode are all equal for normal curve. If you have a normal curve, so one way of determining it is you check mean, median, and mode value. It will be equal. It should be noted the median is more accurate measure to summarize the data as mean. So specifically when it is skewed, then median will give you a better representation than mean. The normal curves are like bell-shaped curve, and they are within 3 standard deviations of means. 96% of data occurs within 3 standard deviation of mean. So here you can see I have given you an example of negatively skewed curve, positively skewed curve, and then normal curve where all the 3 things, mean, median, mode, are equal. So there is no skewness here. Now, after you have summarized the data, you have performed bit of summarization analysis part. You need to pre-process the data. So you can do outlier analysis. Outlier analysis are data points that lie very far away from the other data points. So the presence of these outliers may adversely affect the results in data analysis. So the mean no longer remains a true representative to capture central tendency. Normally use median. So in regression analysis, the values are squared, hence the outliers may be may influence the results. The outlier may affect the data analysis. See, for example, if I have fraud detection kind of problem, so their outliers are very important. But outlier may be present due to your typological mistakes. They may influence all of your results. So you as a researcher, after identifying outliers, need to take a conscious decision whether to retain them or to remove them. So there are 3 types of outliers. First are univariate outliers. So influential data points that occur within a single variable, they are known as univariate outliers. Bivariate, these occur when 2 variables are considered in combinations. And multivariate outliers are when more than 2 variables are considered in combinations. So all of the first and last step normally we do in research. So once the outliers are detected, the researcher must take a conscious decision of inclusion or exclusion. So they are anomalies. They are signals that anomalies are present. So you need to take a decision whether to retain them or not. Now coming on to various methods, I normally teach them all in the class. I will introduce you to box plots. Box plot, z-score, scatter plot. These methods are used for calculating the outliers. Box plots and scatter plots are very popular methods for calculating univariate and bivariate outliers. Box plots are based on median and quartiles. So the lower and upper quartile stats are used to construct a box plot. The median value is the middle of the data, and the data set, half of it lies above and below that. So this is kind of box plot that normally is there. So you can see median is there in between. You will also get skewness, idea about skewness if you see a box plot. If your median is here or here, you'll get an idea that data is skewed. So here, this is the lower quartile. Quartile already we have learned how to calculate. This is upper quartile. Then we have start of the tail and end of the tail. So I will tell you how to calculate it, but it's the important thing is that any point that lies below start of the tail or above end of the tail, that is known as an outlier. That means it lies outside the box. The box starts at the lower quartile and ends at the upper quartile. The distance between lower and upper quartile is known as the length of the box. The tails of the box specifies the bounds between which all data must. So that is, these are the boundaries, the tails, the lower tail and upper tail, everything, the start and end of the tail. So yeah, all the data points should lie in between. The start of the tail is calculated by, using this formula, quartile, lower quartile minus 1.5 into interquartile range. And the end of the tail is calculated by, adding 1.5 into interquartile range into the quartile 3, that is upper quartile. So these values are truncated to the nearest values of the actual data points in order to avoid negative value. Thus, actual start of the tail is the lowest value in the variable, just above the calculated value, and the actual end of the tail is the highest value, just below the calculated value. So any data point that lie is an outlier that lie outside the start or end of the tail, and then you need to analyze whether you should include it or exclude it. That is totally the decision of researcher. There is no hard and fast formula for inclusion and exclusion. As I've told you, in fraud detection, the outlier is the most important part. You are actually analyzing the unusual patterns only when you talk about fraud detection. After this, the next pre-processing step is attribute reduction. If you are missing value, then again you have to see how you handle it. You can use mean, you can delete those training samples. So it depends, or you can use an appropriate technique that can handle missing value data and so on. So if you have very multiple attributes, first it's very important to identify relevant and non-redundant ones. Relevant and non-redundant ones. So they only, because why? Because they add noise to your computational time. They increase your computational time. And in fact, few techniques cannot work on so many variables. If you talk about neural network, you need to do attribute reduction before applying a neural net techniques. It can work on very few attributes. Otherwise, the time will increase exponentially and its performance will also decrease. So the advantage of applying attribute reduction methods are that improved model interpretability, faster training time, reduction in overfitting, and reduction in noise, and so on. So reducing the dimensionality of the data reduces the size of the hypothesis space and allows the methods to operate faster and more effectively and accurately. As I have told you, there are two reduction methods. First is, attribute selection. In this step, you need to select a subset of attributes by eliminating the attributes that have little or no predictive, information. Attribute extraction means combining the relevant attributes into a new set of attributes. So when you convert your 3 attributes into one set, where one you transform it to another measure, where that measure represents the categories of all the 3 variables. It's known as attribute transformation or extraction. Here you see, when you select an attribute, so you are selecting from the set you have, and you transform it into another set of variables. It's known as attribute extraction. So normally principal component analysis is example of attribute extraction. Now further you can categorize these techniques. Attribute selection can be categorized into wrapper or filter method, and attribute extraction can be categorized into supervised or unsupervised learning, so and so on. Attribute selection involves selecting a subset of attributes from a given attributes. For example, univariate analysis. Correlation-based feature selection is very, very popular when you talk about its use in machine learning. It's very popular when you use machine learning techniques. Now, wrapper and filter. See, wrapper means, what do you mean by wrapper and what do you mean by filter? In wrapper, what do? You first select a variable, and then important variables, and then you apply the learning algorithm. You can see here that you reduce the set by applying a learning algorithm, you evaluate it, and then you get the final attributes, and then you apply training data and testing data on it. In filter, what do you do? In filter, you generate the attributes, and you apply some attribute selection technique. So here, your machine learning technique only gives you feedback about the attribute. So what you do, for example, you repeatedly apply decision tree and see, select the best combination of attributes. Here, you use some such as you can chi-square method, or you can use some method, a correlation based feature selection. You use some method for attribute selection, and then after selecting the relevant attributes, you apply the machine learning technique. So here you apply it, simultaneously you keep on applying machine learning technique. So you use machine learning techniques for attribute selection. In filter, you don't use. You use a proper, method, a heuristic search method, or a correlation based feature selection method, and so on. Extraction, I already told you, it's when you transform the existing attributes and produce new attributes by combining or aggregating the original ones. So it's known as, so principal component analysis is an example of it. So in research conduct analysis, the following steps are performed. You compute the, you execute basically the hypothesis that you have formed in this step. So let's come on to the very important part, model development. So models are constructed using historical data, and they are developed for prediction systems. They involve three main elements: independent variable, dependent variable, and the technique. Before development of the model, the experiment design is constructed. We have already done that. Your attributes have been, pre-processed, and they have been reduced. So now we will divide the data into two parts: training and testing. And this part already we have carried out after that. So developing, then you develop the model, and then you validate the model. So, you need to select an appropriate performance analyzer that you can do based on nature and the type of dependent variable. And then you can use any appropriate validation method. It's known as cross-validation method for validation. So see, when you talk about predictive modeling, we have historical data with us. We have training instances with binary classes, maybe, for example, C1, C2 labels. We have, predictors, matrix set, or predictors such as independent variables. We apply machine learning technique, or any, you can say predictive data analysis technique. You create a predictive model, and then, future instances are, given to this model, and then it predicts whether C1 or C2 will be, belongs to that future instances. This is a kind of mechanism that is being used. Now, how to go about validation? No longer cross validation is, it is being used, but I will tell you, these days we also use inter-release validation, or inter-project validation, or cross-project validation to validate our results. But the cross validation basically specifies the ratio by which the data set is divided, 70-30, or what will be the ratio. It depends upon the size of data, which cross validation technique you will use for validating the model. So first is, holdout technique. So when you have very large data, then only it can be used. See, every method that you use in your experiment data, it should have a logic behind that. So you should, always select an appropriate technique or method after analyzing, that technique or method. So if you have large data, then you can use. But I have seen students, they even use it when you have 200 data points. No, then you should not go for holdout validation. If you go for holdout validation, then you'll have to have multiple iteration, more than 30 iterations. So 2/3 of the data is used for training, and 1/3 is used. See, it's logical. When you have large data only, then you divide it into two parts: 2/3 for training, 1/3 for validation. K-cross means when you divide the data into K parts. So it's when it's used when you have medium-sized data. So you divide your data into K parts. K-1 parts are used for training, and the 1th part, the left one part, is used for testing. And this procedure is repeated K times. And normally K is equal to 10 in research. So K cross validation you carry out, you divide the data into 10 parts, 9 parts are used for training, one part is used for testing, and this procedure is carried out 10 times. So you get validation error for all the data points. Then if you have very, very limited data, 40 samples, 50 samples, very small data, so you can leave one out. So for example, I have 10 sample data. So what I will do, I will use 9 data points for training and only one. That's as soon as leave one out, one for validation. So each time one is used for validation. This procedure is again repeated. Now coming on to which performance analyzer you may use. I will not go in detail, but yeah, if you have categorical type of dependent variable, you can use sensitivity, specificity, accuracy, precision. Each of one have disadvantages and advantages associated with them. I believe if you have imbalanced data, or if you ask me, area under the curve, calculated using receiver operating characteristic curve is the most appropriate measure that can be used in research. There are other few ones also, such as G-mean, balance. And if you have continuous type of dependent variable, then mean relative error, mean absolute relative error, correlation coefficient, all these things you can calculate and see the predictive accuracy of the model. Now comes what are the concerns. So you are creating models, you are doing exploratory analysis. What concerns you should keep in mind? First is overfitting. Any technique, not machine learning, data analysis technique you apply, you need to check for overfitting. What do you mean by overfitting? When your training error is very low and your generalization, validation error is very high, that means model has overfitted. It has learned noise rather than relationships. So overfitting occurs when the model has too many parameters as compared to the number of data samples. So increasing the number of data samples may reduce overfitting. Now, when actual values do not match the predictive values, degree to which the model estimates new or unseen data is known as generalization error. So when your generalization error is very high and your empirical error is low, that means overfitting has occurred. That means generalization means validation error. In supervised learning, creating model that learns the relevant patterns or relationships and do not overfit the training data is very difficult. So generally a balance between the two is difficult, bias and variance. Bias means underfitting. That means model is too simple. Kuch bhi nahi usne learn kiya. It doesn't capture any relationship. Variance means that model is too complex. It has captured, more than it should have been captured. It's known as overfitting. So, balance between bias and variance is very difficult to obtain. And some of the solutions are, if you have high bias, you can increase the number of attributes. If you have high variance, you can increase training samples, or you can reduce the number of attributes. The next concern in predictive modeling or model prediction is, multicollinearity. That means eight variables. So for example, I had 3 variables, humidity, temperature. Humidity has made temperature related to the type of the day, the dependent variable. That means one of the independent variable is influencing another independent variable and making it related to the dependent variable. That is known as multicollinearity effect. You need to measure it. There are so many ways in measuring it. You can calculate the conditional number. You can use variance inflation factor. So many techniques are present there to calculate the multicollinearity and effect. Next concern is imbalanced data. So I've told you, when you have one category in majority and one in minority, that means your data is imbalanced. So when a model is developed with imbalanced data, it tends to be strongly biased towards the majority class. Hey, if you have maximum samples data of sunny day, obviously your model will be biased towards it. So you need to deal with it. How to deal with it? So many ways to deal with it. Appropriate performance measure, area under the curve, balance, G-mean. These 3 can be used when you have imbalanced data. Use of oversampling, undersampling technique. You can use an oversampling and undersampling technique. Oversampling means you can, you can increase the classes of minority samples by using some technique. I will not go into detail. There are so many SMOT and Lot many spiders, node, many techniques are there for oversampling. Undersampling means that you reduce the majority class. उसको काट दीजिए, बैलेंस करना है ना दोनों को. Then again, another learning type is cost sensitive learning, that you give, assign some cost to, true positive to negative, so and so on. So you again, speak on ours and our own. This is another, area of research you can go into. And guidelines already have told you that the technique, the data analysis technique should be simple, accurate, interpretable, and so on. So that is fine. Another issue when you create a model is parameter tuning. So neither you should overtune, neither you should undertune. Sometimes, so that's why a lot of times you must have been using default parameters. जो वेका ने डाल दिया, जो SPSS ने डाल दिया, you never change them. So selecting an optimum set of parameters is another job among a large number of possible parameter values. So your knowledge, your experience, your rules of thumb, it's a brute force kind of thing. Example: number of hidden units in neural network, number of hidden layers in neural network. How will you determine them? If you have small data, you should only have one hidden layer. Simple. तब आप deep थोड़ा ना ले जाओगे, क्योंकि because you want to apply deep learning, you will keep on increasing the layers. No, you will just use a single layer. If you have even medium size, when you are very very large, then you think of increasing the number of layers. Then it's always by hit and trial you can determine number of neurons in a hidden layer. So parameters, identifying parameters, parameter tuning is another job. Default parameter setting might be effective, but not close to optimum parameter setting. So you should not overtune them. अगर overtune करेंगे फिर वही दिक्कत आ जाएगी, overfitting. So you should be very careful while tuning the parameters. Nowadays we have so many techniques, formal techniques, differential evolution. There are so many things we can apply to tune the parameters. Now next phase, we are moving towards the end. So is interpreting, how to interpret the results. So see, you need to, if your hypothesis was, proven to be false or true, you need to determine why. Why is very important. Relating theory to practical observation is, that the job of this step. And you also need to state, and, saying again and again, the limitation needs to be stated here. Always when you carry out an experiment, should be fair. Fair analysis is very important in research. So what issues you should address while interpreting the results? First, does the results support the research hypothesis? Yes, no. And yes, why? No, why? Who will be benefited by the results? So in society, who will be benefited? The software engineer, your developer, or a tester, or a customer? What are the limitations of the study? How does the study do the past studies? What lessons very important you have learned from the study? Now, when you present that study, the results, you need to do qualitative and quantitative. When I say quantitative, you can use tables, charts, line charts, box plots, so many things to qualitatively analyzing the results. And when you quantitatively analyzing them. When you qualitatively analyze them, then you do it in a form of textual. Why naive Bayes came to best on your study. Now, null hypothesis is true, but the researcher always want to reject the null hypothesis. But by your data, it comes out to be true, it's fine. Because this is the sample data from a population data. It's not a complete conclusion that you have. You have only extracted that conclusion that is valid on that sample data that you have, Finally, reporting results. So finally, after the empirical study has been conducted and interpreted, the study, you need to report the result in a desired format. As I have already told you, now it depends upon what is the venue of publication. It's a conference, it's a journal, it's a white paper. If you are working in an industry, it's a technical report, or it's a project for which you are writing, summarizing the things, or it's a kind of you can say your thesis work, or any. It depends upon. And then comes very important that I was discussing ethics of empirical research. In our software engineering, for example, I have a funding organization, so I need to follow the ethics. My sponsors, my academician, researcher They all should be aware of research ethics while conducting and funding the research. So the upholding of ethical standard helps to develop trust between the researcher and participants. So you should not first reveal the name of participants. You should not reveal the name of software organization. So it should be, you should very fairly follow the contract that you have with the organization from where you have conducted any survey or a questionnaire, or you have conducted collected data. An unethical study can harm the reputation of the research in any area, not in software engineering area. And I know we have a lot of awareness on plagiarism, but still, plagiarism is very important. We have, being a government university or any organization, educational institute, we have strict policy. You can go through UGC 2018 guidelines, where we have, strong implications of plagiarism on a career of a faculty or even a student. Your degree can be cancelled if you are a student. So you should go through that document. But IEEE defines plagiarism as the reuse of someone else's prior ideas, processes, results, or words without explicitly acknowledging the original author. So if you don't explicitly acknowledge the original author and source, you need to that means you are doing plagiarism. You have to acknowledge the source from where you are copying. That's not your idea. So you are copying the results, you are copying the idea, you're copying the thoughts of someone else. Even if you paraphrases, it is known as paraphrasing, means rearranging. You change the language of the sentence, then also it's someone else's work, someone else's idea, someone else's idea, words. You need to acknowledge the source. If you copy your own work, you have already published it somewhere else. It's known as self-plagiarism. So there are serious action against authors, who commit plagiarism. Now I'll just move on to my third and fourth part quickly. I'll introduce you towards machine learning concepts. So machine learning techniques can be applied when we talk about, there are so many things that I've kept on telling you what can be applied. Z-score can be applied, box plot, mean, median, mode, and everything. And now I'm coming on to machine learning concepts. So just basics, and then I'll move on to the tools that can be used for data analysis. You are aware of those tools. Just to summarize, which tools can be used. So see, if I have a mobile phone and I type something and it gives me auto suggest. What is it? It's a machine learning. So that's the everyday use of machine learning. I use Google Maps. What is it? It is again a use of machine learning. So Google has, introduced machine learning to Google Maps in 2017. So machine learning helps to extract street names, house names, photos. So what Google cars do in United States, they go to various places, they click on the pictures, and then they extract, these street house numbers, street names, and it is used in various things. There, it's also used in demographical analysis and analysis of, the people who are staying in various houses. So it is done there. I open Amazon. I use Facebook. Whenever I open it, it gives me Fab India and these things, and it gives me these books I can purchase from Amazon. So what is it? It's online recommendation. Amazon keeps on mailing me that these are recommendations for you for particular item. So what is it? And again, it's a example of machine learning where they have actually captured your search patterns, and then they have learned from it, and now they are suggesting few things based on those patterns. There are other classic example like self-driving cars are there, and we have these various you can say outlets in US where you can just go and purchase and go things, and everything will be calculated based on your image processing tools and so on, and your face identification thing and your account identification based on it. So all these are examples of machine learning. Now just I want you to know what is machine learning. Machine learning, basically we are aware of it, but I always see that people lag in this way, that they don't know actually what is the appropriate definition of machine learning. So machine learning, basically it is to develop programs that learn from experience, that automatically improve the performance and adapt they adapt to new environment over time. So you develop programs that have the ability to learn from past data, historical data, from experience, that automatically improve their performance, and that automatically adapt to new environment over a period of time. That is the purpose of machine learning algorithms. Machine learning techniques are well suited for real world applications that use methods to extract useful information and complex. So they can solve complex problem in less time. Less time, complex problem. Characteristic of a machine learning algorithm. They take less time. They can be used to solve complex problems. They can be tolerant to data that is inaccurate, that is partially incorrect, or that is uncertain, and so on. So these methods can be used to construct predictive models, and they can be used in making future predictions. The benefits of machine learning techniques include complex relationship can be models using it, and they can be easily adaptable to changing environments as new knowledge is discovered. Now they are coming on to just quickly summarizing the top 10 companies in the area of machine learning. Google, IBM, Baidu, Microsoft, Twitter, Qubit, Intel, Apple, Salesforce, Pindrop, and so on. So these are few names of companies who are into it. Then type of machine learning techniques. Someone was asking me, so unsupervised. Supervised and unsupervised are two categories of machine learning techniques. So when you have outcome variable available, then obviously a supervisor is there, and you create a model, and for example, for spam detection, fault prediction, and so on. So it's known as use of supervised learning. In unsupervised learning, you learn pattern by using clustering techniques. So your job is to learn patterns. I'll explain you with the help of example. Let's see here I have few pictures where I have labeled these pictures. This is a cat, this is a dog, this is again a dog, this is a cat. So I make these pictures available. These are my training data. So I create models based on these pictures. And when I have a new instance, my model should be able to predict whether it's a cat or a dog. So when I provide it a new picture, it automatically predicts because it has learned the characteristics from the picture, and it applies those learning experiences, and it basically tells you whether it's a cat or a dog. Supervised learning can further be divided into two categories: classification and regression. Classification means when you have your dependent variable as categorical. Regression techniques are used when you have dependent variable as continuous. So linear regression, for example, is a statistical technique that can be applied when your dependent variable is continuous. Logistic regression again is a statistical technique that can be applied when your dependent variable has few categories. It's categorical. Now, what is unsupervised learning? Let's try to take an example and see. I have 5 news items. I have extracted few keywords from those items. News item 1, crime, loss, revenge. News item 2, prize, cricket, runner-up. News item 3, athletics, medal, proud. News item 4, Brugley, punishment, bank. News item 5, world record, training, illustrious. So I have already extracted important keywords from each news item. Now I need to find hidden patterns given the inputs. So if I'll carefully observe, I'll find that N1 and N4, they are related to crime. N2, N3, N5 are related to sports. So what I have done, I have categorized my similar kind of inputs words into a particular category. Right? I have tried to find a hidden pattern out of it. That N5, N2, and N3 belongs to sport, and N1 and N4 belong to crime. This is an example of unsupervised learning. Reinforcement learning, basically you provide feedback. It's normally used in game playing where you need to provide feedback to the algorithm in real time as it trains. So for example, I have this is a robo. It's an agent. I want to train that agent to stay away from fire and to stay away from water. So the agent has to learn the actions in environment where fire and water are present. So when action taken by agent is touch fire, then obviously I will award in the agent negatively, so that next time it doesn't go near the fire. So that so what I will do, I will observe, I will select an policy, I will take action, I will give penalty or reward, and then I'll keep on updating, iteratively updating the policy until then an appropriate optimal policy is found. Thus agent learns to stay away from fire by this deep learning is an emerging technique. So it's nothing but when you deepen the neural network, when deep learning is only valuable with large and complex data. So when you have very very large data, it's in it's of complex nature, then only it is applicable. So deep learning involves many layers of neural networks. So algorithms modeled on the structure of human brain. So when you deepen those neural network, you increase the hidden layers. It's known as deep learning. Supervised learning can be categorized into various categories. So I'll not go into detail. You must be aware of these categories. There are various types of neural networks: artificial neural network, convolutional neural networks, PNN, probabilistic neural network, and so on. And decision trees such as C4.5, classification and regression trees, and there are so many. The list goes on. Guide algorithm, then J48, and so on. And then I have Bayesian learning techniques, naive Bayes, and so on. Ensemble learning, random forest, bagging, boosting, rule-based learning, support vector machine, evolutionary, genetic, particle swarm, and so on. So many categories are there and techniques that can be applied. Now summarizing the tools. So I will now quickly summarize what are the tools available for analyzing the data. So first is Veka. Veka is a Vekaito environment for knowledge analysis. It's a very good tool, open source tool basically. It has been developed in Java language. Can be used for machine learning algorithms. Then we have Keel. Keel is another, it's a open source tool. It has various hybridized and evolutionary algorithms implemented. SPSS is a social science package for statistical science. It's a proprietary tool. Sorry, statistical package for social sciences. So it's again a proprietary tool. You can use that tool. It's a strong tool where you have lot many, I can say, statistical test and multivariate techniques implemented. So it's heavily based on statistical. In today's, when I talk about data science, it's a very important tool that can be used, but it's a proprietary tool. It's owned by IBM. Then comes MATLAB. MATLAB is again a proprietary tool. In basically, if you want to use MATLAB, if you have new mathematical algorithm that you want to create and code, so you can use this. R is again an open source. It has extensive support library. R can be used. It has you can say extensive support for. It has library support also, and again it's very good as it is open source, and it is also being widely used in industry. Then comes Octave. Octave is a counterpart of MATLAB. It's an open source tool, but it's not user friendly. I don't recommend my students to use this tool, but it's counterpart of MATLAB. It's open source, so it's a powerful mathematical oriented algorithm tool that you can use. Then we have Python. Obviously Python is all of you are aware of that. We can it also provides extensive library support, and also you can also create your new algorithms when you use Python. So SPSS, statistical package for social sciences. It's a software package that provides a tool for data analysis. So it has 4 major functions. First is it allows you to create and maintain data set. Analysis, whatever I have explained you today. So everything, mean, median, mode, standard deviation, quartile, then attribute reduction, and analyzing, detecting outliers, and finding data is normal or not. Everything is there implemented in SPSS. It has strong data analysis support. So analyzing the data. Then producing results after analysis. So it has, all the statistical tests, pair tree test, Friedman test, Wilcoxon signed rank test implemented. Also, it has various, techniques, linear regression, logistic regression implemented, and few machine learning ones too. And then it has strong, analysis part after the result analysis, I mean to say. So it produces results after analysis. So you can have various graphs, and if you want to have ROC results analyzed there, so everything, strong analysis, result analysis part is also present there. So yeah, it was owned by IBM since it is 2009. This is basically, you can see here that I have few. This is a screenshot of SPSS tool where I have file, edit, view, data, transform, analyze, graphs, utilities, add-ons, everything is there. So you can use these things to analyze the data. Very strong support it has. MATLAB is, Matrix Laboratory, it's its full form. It's a high performance interactive software system which integrates computation and visualization. And this is proprietary. SPS is also proprietary. So it was developed by Cleve Moller in 1917s, back in 1917. In 1984, it was owned by MathWorks and was created to commercialize and continue development of. MATLAB has, strong. It is designed for matrix computation and large computation support it provides. It also has easy to use graphic commands, and it also has few tools that you can use, such as NN tool and so on. So modern programming language environment which has sophisticated data structures. So it's a very good tool if you want to develop your new algorithms. Then, as I've told you, it also has some toolboxes, so such as fuzzy logic, neural network, genetic algorithm, image processing, Simulink. Then NFIS tool is also there, and so on. Veka is, Mikaito environment. It was developed by these are open source which I'm talking about. So the previous ones were they were proprietary tools. It was developed at the University of Waikato in New Zealand. Again, it's a very, it is developed in Java. It has so many. It can be installed and used in so many platforms such as Linux, Windows, and so on. So again, it provides an easy to use the interface is very easy. The algorithms, you can go through their, help and understand the algorithms also. It's very good, user-friendly tool. So this is a screenshot of Veka where you have 4 things, and Explorer and Experimenter. These are widely used. Explorer you use when you want to analyze individual techniques. Experimenter can compare them also and provide you the results. So it has 4 blocks. So it depends upon which one you want to use. Explorer has various, it can pre-process data. So many pre-processing techniques. Everything which I've talked about is implemented here. And then it has classification tab. Then it has cluster tab, and so on. Here you can see pre-process, classify, cluster, associate. If you want to select an important attributes, there is a select tab. If you want to visualize few attributes, there is a visualize tab, and so on. All these things, knowledge extraction based on evolutionary learning. It's again very powerful tool, but it takes hours and hours to execute algorithms. There are hybridized and evolutionary search-based algorithm implemented in it. Again, it's an open source tool, so you should go ahead and use it. It's a user-friendly kind of environment it provides you. I'll just show you its window first. Yeah, it's here you can see it has data management. It can be used for educational, experimental purpose, and so on. So it's a very user-friendly tool. You can just, you can say, you can drag the data here. You can connect it to the algorithm. Then you can, if you want to apply some tests, you can, associate with it. If you want to check someone's, calculate some performance measures, you can associate with it. So it's a, kind of link, and when you execute it, the results get saved automatically. In your folders. So it's again very user-friendly tool. R was developed by Ross and Robert, and again at University of Auckland in New Zealand. It's a freely available again tool. It's a very well developed, and in fact in industry it's being widely used in analytics, data analytics part. So it's effective, a very simple and effective programming language. it's developed in. It's very good for statistics. See, it's a, if you don't want SPS, it's a proprietary tool, then you can use R. It's a very good tool. It has various characteristics. It's flexible. It has advanced statistical language. It's extremely comprehensive. It has cross platform compatibility. Outstanding graphs can be created using it. So many advantages you have. Octave again is free, but I told you that it's not user friendly. If you talk about it's the only disadvantage that I have observed. It's a high level programming language software that can be used for numerical computations. It was started by Eaton in 1992. So it is compatible with MATLAB and can be thought of as a very powerful tool for which can be in which you can carry out programming. But I told you it's kind of not that user friendly. So this was all I want to summarize few things for you. Now I am open to questions. Any questions you can ask me if you want to. This is my email. You can also email me anytime you have a doubt. So any questions you have, you can ask me.
Good afternoon, madam.
Good afternoon.
Ma'am, you have talked so much of things, ma'am. It's really very difficult to ask the questions.
You can email me later on if something comes into your mind.
Really, that was very informative, ma'am. Session was very informative, and we got the touch of many of the things, right, ma'am? So currently we are working on these fields only. What we have told us: hypothesis, research, literature review, many of the things, ma'am.
Yes.
So
Each topic in itself, I told you I can speak for hours. So yes, but any ways, if any questions come to any participant's mind, you can ask me.
I just written the question, ma'am, on the chat box.
Okay.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Ma'am, as Ashwin Bharti sir already saying that this is very really informative and interesting session. And ma'am, I'm also working with historical data and machine learning. So ma'am, this is really fruitful for us. And I have some query, but I'll by mail inform you. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Any other participant wants to ask something? My email was there. You can just note it down.
Ma'am, can you share your contact number?
Yes, I can.
Okay, ma'am.
I am putting it into the chat box. Anything else someone wants to ask?
Sumitra ma'am, any questions? I think the participants are much comfortable in questioning you through mail, ma'am, in future. Probably when they come
I have
across.
shared my email ID. I'll just put it on the chat
Yes,
box.
please, ma'am.
Ma'am,
And ma'am, I can see that I, as a nascent researcher, I came across many questions while I was pursuing my literature review. But I feel your PPT and your way of explaining have cleared most of my questions, which it used to strike my mind. And certainly, I will be taking help of your PPT and this video because it is in the
Sure.
recorded mode for my future purposes. And I hope all the participants, we will be sharing this video presentation with them and they'll be really utilizing it for their better understanding. We have got the clear idea about the empirical study, what exactly it comprises of, You have covered almost everything of the data pre-processing and the analysis, the every nook and corner of this particular topic you have covered. Uh, that was really wonderful. Whether it is the model, whether it's statistically things have been covered, you have pointed out such a thing that what exactly the reviewer will look while reviewing the paper, that verifications, how the model performances have been measured by the researchers, that you have made very, very clearly. And you have mentioned about the tools, you have mentioned about the reviewing stuff. Almost like a very basically, you have made the things very clear. Uh, Thank you, ma'am. Session was too good, too good. I don't know why people are not coming forward and asking the question because the same thing that most of the questions they got cleared during the session itself. Uh, Certainly, we'll share the feedback with you all. Uh, and certainly we may get excellent feedback from all the participants because this is the room that they're supposed to give the feedback. They may not be able to open their mouth, but certainly they will be able to put up their feedback. Now the session is over to our organizer, the coordinator, Dr. Pradeep Kumar sir. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ruchika ji.
Thank you, sir, for inviting me and giving me an opportunity.
It is indeed pleasure is ours, ma'am. अश्वनी साहब की कुछ बहुत सारी प्रॉब्लम्स रह रही हैं, कभी कनेक्ट नहीं हो पा रहे हैं, कभी लिंक नहीं मिल पा रहा है, सबसे ज्यादा परेशान हो रहा है. Sir, any question? I can say this much only on behalf of this lecture and Ruchika ma'am. Even if you are able to implement and comply with the 10% of what ma'am has delivered, make sure in one paper, at least Springer, Wiley, up to Elsevier or no Science Dar, anyone you talk, it will go through. That much I can assure you, because ma'am has talked only about those, that part probably missing during your this analysis. So what exactly you what are the inferences from your analysis? What are the insights? What you extract from these sort of analysis? So that has been the focus of this entire session. And we are lucky, Ruchika ma'am. I have this special and extra privilege to invite and have this liberty.
Always,
Ruchika
sir.
ma'am, thank you so very much. On
Thank
behalf
you, sir.
of all the participants, take care and keep on joining for such web series.
So one word I would like to add, ma'am, certainly I am into organizing some or the other programs. In future, I would like to trouble you by giving invitations and
Many
requesting
definitely.
you to deliver some sessions
Sure.
with respect to this topics which you have discussed for our fellow participant. Thank you, ma'am. Because student wanted this kind of stuff. Because everybody may not have this way of expressing things that you are having. You are a reservoir, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, thank you.
Okay, now we take the break for lunch and joining back 2:30 for the
Okay, sir. May I
analysis.
leave, sir, if you permit?
It is, but without any cup of tea, coffee, and that. It is all
No
due.
problem, sir.
All due. With due respect
sir.
and regard. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay, take it. Ashwani, तेरे को तो छोड़ूंगा नहीं मैं.